comes to podcasting, this is something that I kind of started with, and it was, a lot of procrastination in the beginning for me. So I had the idea to start a podcast about a year and a half ago. I didn't start until March of this year. So, you can see it was a long time ago. But, when it comes to starting a podcast, what I realized is a lot of it is a perceived difficulty, right? I thought it was a lot more difficult than it really is. But for somebody who's getting started in the real estate space, or somebody who wants to do podcasting, how should they kind of approach starting it? And do you suggest kind of starting a podcast as, your first exposure or experience to content as well?
Yeah, by all means, if you want to produce content out there, so it all depends if you want to do like podcasting from video, as we do it at the moment, video and audio. Both sides you can do. I fully support, or I fully push a lot of my students to do both, because you want to then be able to reutilize this video as part of your content strategy, as part of your YouTube growth, or, cutting it up and put it on the reels and everything else. So by all means. But yeah, from a simplistic point of view, let's take a step back to that point. From a podcasting point of view is, yeah, it's real simple if you understand it. I use a platform called Anchor.fm. They are real simple in the sense of I push one button and Anchor does everything for me. So literally to start, I'll have an account, give my podcast name, I do a thumbnail, I give a description, I load up my show and I push a button and it does everything for me. Puts it in iTunes, puts it in Spotify, puts it in every single app you can find out there. I think at one stage on my phone, I had 30 podcast apps to see how far my show had gone. And my show was on every single one of those apps. And that was from me just pushing one button on one application. Now, yes, because I've got the simplistic nature on that side, I don't have as depth or in detailed analytics and stats that you heard to have for something like called Lipsum that a lot of companies, people out there. But Lipsum, you also have to pay for it. Anchor is totally free. There's no free and an upgrade version, so you can get into it and it's free for life. It's also owned by Spotify. So obviously, the second largest podcast platform out there owns it. So it's also fully supported in that sense. So from a simplistic nature, by all means, you can jump onto Anchor and load it up and get going. Podcasting is definitely a content strategy that if you're thinking about it, get into the game, it puts it out there. Your SEO will come more into play in this. When I'm searching something on Google, you're likely more going to hit a podcast episode than you're going to hit a YouTube video. Because the podcast gets indexed on iTunes and Spotify, it gets indexed on sort of, how I would say it, on web pages compared to video pages, if that makes sense. So when I will go and search something, sometimes a podcast episode will come up to answer that question. Because in Google or in any content, as we said, is we want to be entertained or we want to be educated. So I go to Google to go, hey, what is the tax rate? What's the tax rate in Nebraska if I sell a property? What is the threshold? What is the cap rate? And someone might have just done a podcast that said cap rate in Nebraska, or what is the cap rate in Nebraska, and done a 5-minute video about it. And that actually pulls up on the front page of Google ahead of a website or anything else, because it is fundamentally on a site. It might pull up the iTunes link, or it might pull up the Spotify one, or even the Anchor one itself. So yeah, you do have those options around there from podcasting.
Yeah, so I'm actually taking notes for myself right now. So I actually didn't know that a podcast actually outranks a video when it comes to SEO. So that's actually really interesting.
Yeah, if you're on Google, just Google by its nature, because Google's got the video section. So if I go to Google, and I go into that section, it very rarely is going to pull a video through into the front page. And normally what it'll do is it'll push the video into the video sections. Where it only pulls a video into the front page is when you've got something called chapters. So what a chapter is and you'll find this very commonly in going, hey, how do I find, I'm going to go real simple with this. How do I find my dipstick in my Toyota Hilux 2008, right? Someone on YouTube's done that exact video and they've made it a chapter. Now, I can explain something about chapters later on if anyone's wanting to know. And what happens is then the YouTube might pull that 3-minute chapter onto the front page of Google as going, hey, this is how you do it. You can sometimes see that on the front page of Google. But fundamentally, you are going to get websites or index sites as your response on Google. So your podcast text base sitting on Spotify or iTunes or Anchor or any one of those other ones, Google Podcasts is going to likely hit on that front page before the YouTube video will pull through. Obviously, when I go to YouTube, the video pulls through. But it was so you do have that sort of piece there. So the SEO side of things becomes more in play when you're on the when you think on the audio podcast side.
Right. So wow, that's actually super interesting for me. So I didn't even know that. So full disclosure, I started my podcast just to get some content out there. And usually, I mean, obviously, practicing my communication skill sets as well as, being a host of a podcast. So I do actually have some more questions on this, when it comes to podcast SEO. So, ranking a podcast on Google. So I have a blog. I have some experience with SEO. We have, one of the top ranking blogs for certain keywords. For text. But when it comes to podcasting SEO, what are some metrics, right? So when it comes to like a blog, keyword optimization, right? How many times keyword shows up, the URL for the keyword, that's all comes into play. But when it comes to a podcast SEO and ranking on Google, is there one of the specific platforms that, outranks, other ones like Spotify is going to be better than iTunes, or, what are some things you should be looking out for if you want to rank your podcast for certain keywords?
It's fundamentally just the keywords. So it's depending where your audience sits and understanding again where your audience is going to be, right? So if I want to drive, a lot of people that takes podcasting and they want to go real important, they'll take that content over onto their own website. So, right, the podcast will still sit on Google Podcasts, or it'll still sit everywhere else, but then they'll take the exact same information and they'll put it on their websites, right? So they'll put it on, buypropertywithme.com, and it will have the episode, and you might have all the text base, or you might actually have the full length transcript. A lot of people go for the full length transcript in there to get all that in knowledge and information out there. But to index, and I'm not an SEO specialist, so don't hold me to this, but fundamentally, you still got to have the keywords that are related to the search term that someone's going with. So if your content or your blog, that's, let's say old school blog, which is actually a blog of the podcast, has the terminologies that are responding to the answer of the question that's been asked, that's how the correlation works, right? I go into Google to say, hey, here's my question, what is the answer? And then Google goes and finds and builds these relationships up there as well. As the traffic increases on your webpage, as you drive more people related to that search term to your website, the correlation gets stronger. So what I mean by that is just a old school YouTube hack is, as you're starting to you grow and you get bigger, and if you had 10 or 15 friends that's willing to help you, you could tell them, hey, I've just released a video on YouTube, or I've just released an article. Can you go and search for this term and see if you can see my content? And if you can you click on it? That tells YouTube or tells Google, hey, there's a very strong correlation, and it builds the link stronger. And then your rankings will go up. This strategy is very big in the YouTube space. This is stuff that I give away in my free mentorship, that anyone that's interested at the moment, we won't go too far in it. I will give further details on it. But this is where you can rank. I rank on the first page of YouTube with 100 views next to a video that's got 5 million views. It's just understanding those keywords that are answering the question that's been asked, and then people going and seeing it and then clicking on it.